Hey everybody, I'm Justin with AmericanMuscle.com, and these are going to be my top picks in the lowering spring category for all 2010 through 2014 Mustangs. Now in this video, I'm going to give you a couple of different choices to lower your Mustang from both a mild to a wild drop, and even offer some purpose-specific springs for both drag racing and competition. Like the rest of our top pick series here at AM, all of these springs were chosen based off of my personal experience with the company, in addition to factoring in some customer feedback and reviews to hopefully make your life a little bit easier when it comes time to lower that ride. So why install a set of lowering springs onto your Mustang? Well, long story short, the factory ride height really isn't all that attractive, and therefore is one of the first things to get fixed through aftermarket parts. A lowered Mustang will not only look much better thanks to eliminating that ugly wheel gap, but it's also going to handle a little bit better as well thanks to the lower center of gravity and the firmer spring rates. Now ultimately, a lowering spring will be the easiest and most affordable way to do this compared to options like coilovers or air ride, which will offer some adjustability, but will be far more expensive than the lowering springs we have here. So the next question is, how do you know what spring is going to be right for you and your Mustang? Well, if you've been shopping around for aftermarket springs, you've probably discovered a bunch of options out there. Springs that will give you a relatively mild drop, to springs that will give you a more aggressive drop to give the car a more modified look. And with that said, let's take a closer look at my first spring choice in the video here, my selection for a mild lowering spring. And for that, I went with the most popular lowering spring on the site currently for the S197, the SR Performance lowering springs. Now these are going to be an awesome choice for the S197 owners out there who are looking for a slightly lower ride height, but at the same time don't want to have to worry about scraping on every driveway or speed bump in town. The SR springs are going to lower your Mustang 1.5 inches on all four corners, which in my opinion is the perfect amount for the S197 because it's going to get rid of all that factory wheel gap, but at the same time it's still going to maintain the slightest bit of rake, meaning the front is going to be a little bit lower than the rear, making for that classic muscle car stance. Now the SR springs do feature what is called a progressive spring rate, and what that means is these things are going to progressively firm up the harder the car is pushed. And that's something that a lot of the aftermarket springs for the S197 will have in common. In my opinion, a progressive spring is going to be a little bit more comfortable while on the road, maybe a little better suited for the daily drivers out there, thanks largely in part to the lighter initial spring rate, which just means these things won't be so stiff and firm at all times. Speaking of spring rates, you're looking at a 230-pound front spring and a 200-pound rear spring respectively. And I actually have a good amount of experience here with the SR springs in particular. I had these things installed on my personal 2014 GT for a couple of years and I really had no complaints. They rode good, they weren't too bouncy, and they performed rather well. And if you don't want my word for it, check out the nearly 100+ 5-star reviews on the site with these springs. It should help you make your own decision. Now ultimately these things aren't going to be the flashiest spring out there, but they're going to get the job done and for not a lot of dough. But what if you crave something more? You really love that slam look and you want to get the car down as low as possible using a spring. For that, I recommend the iBox Sportlines. In fact, anytime someone asks me what is the lowest spring you can go for right out of the box, Sportline is an easy answer because it continues to be one of the most aggressive spring offerings for a number of different generation Mustangs, and it was an easy choice for my wild spring for the S197. Breaking down the drop a little bit, you're going to be looking at 1.3 inches for the front and a whopping 2 inches in the rear, which is going to get the entire car down low and eliminate some of that rake we talked about with the SR Performance springs. This is going to give the car a more leveled appearance, again lowering both the front and rear, which some people might like, others might not. Either way, it is one of the bigger drops in the category. Like those SR Performance lowering springs, you are looking at a progressive spring rate here at the Sportlines. You got a 184-pound front spring with a 103 to 207-pound spring in the rear. Again, guys, these things do firm up the harder they are pushed. And like those SR Performance lowering springs, the Sportlines have a glowing review here at AmericanMuscle.com with over 100+ 5-star reviews and a bunch of customer submitted images. Check those things out because it's going to give you a better idea of how your own ride might look with these springs installed. But what if you're into more than just good looks and slightly improved handling on that daily driver? What if you're really serious about competing with your Mustang, whether in drag racing or on a road course? Well, luckily there are manufacturers out there that produce some specialty springs that should help improve your performance, whether drag racing or otherwise. If you're into drag racing, then may I suggest the Ford Performance Cobra Jet drag springs, my top pick for drag racing springs for the S197 Mustang, and a favorite with a lot of owners here on the site. Yes, these are the same exact springs used on the purpose-built Cobra Jet drag car, which is good for 8-second quarter-mile time slips. As far as drop, well, you're looking at a big-time muscle car stance here, guys. 1 3/4 inches up front with only an inch drop in the rear gives you plenty of rake and a lot of room for a big tire in the rear. But what if going straight just simply isn't your thing? You prefer the twists and turns of a road course or an autocross track to a drag strip? Well, for that, I'm going to direct you towards one of the most popular springs on the site for handling performance, the Steeda Sport Springs. As far as drop, well, you're looking at just over an inch in the rear and exactly 1 inch up front, and spring rates of 200 pounds for the front and 175 pounds for the rear. Obviously, yes, you're getting a little bit lower of a ride height with these springs, but that's not what Steeda was focused on. Instead, they wanted to make something that was going to be very predictable when pushed hard when doing some competition or road course racing. And they were able to do this by using what is called a linear spring rate or a standard spring rate. Now, this is going to be a little bit different from those first two springs we talked about, the SR and IBOC options, which utilize that progressive spring rate. Instead, a linear spring rate is only giving you one rate. There's no varying rate, which makes the springs a little bit more predictable overall. Now, these won't be as comfortable on your daily driven Mustang because they're not going to feature that softer initial spring rate like the progressives, but again, they will be a little bit more predictable, and it's something you're generally going to see on competition type springs. And people do install these on their daily driven Mustang, both the Steedas and the Cobra Jet springs we just talked about, with no complaints and great results. No matter what spring you decide to go with, guys, they all are going to install pretty much the same way here, using a variation of tools including sockets, wrenches, a spring compressor, lift or jack and jack stands. Now, as far as difficulty, I typically call the S197 spring installs a soft 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty scale because it's really not all that bad depending on your level of expertise and should only take you a couple of hours to knock out from start to finish. I also always like to recommend getting your alignment checked out after a spring installation because depending on how low you go, you might need to include some parts like caster camber plates or even camber bolts if the factory components can no longer get you back into spec. Nevertheless, your local alignment shop should be able to help you out with that. Also, guys, don't forget, if you go really low, you might need to invest into an adjustable panhard bar, as that rear axle will no doubt shift on spring installations. Well, guys, that's going to do it for my top picks here for the lowering spring category for all 2010 through 2014 Mustangs. I hope it's helped you on your quest to lower that ride. And guys, keep in mind, these are only a few suggestions. There are a number of great options on the site, all of which will do the job of lowering your Mustang and improving your handling. Thanks for watching. I'm Justin, and for all things Mustang, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.